Okay, Ashton. So I'm going to cover just the basics as you requested, and hope this makes sense. And if it doesn't, you can just ask me some other stuff. But maybe this will get you on the road to figuring some of this stuff out little less crazy. Okay, so this opens up obviously to this thing, ZBrush. I'm going to close that. And by default now this opens up to your last project, which is what I had here. But before I do that, I want to make sure you know about these two things. Okay, these are two handouts I stuck in, I think, the first module. They're also in the files section of Canvas. So make sure you have these, available when you're working, so you can kind of, remind yourself of how some of these funky things work. This is kind of the basics of the handouts, okay? And these are all the kind of key commands that you'll be using as you kind of go through things, and I'll explain those, the ones that I use today as I go, okay? So back to here. So what I suggest you do is just start with this guy right here, sphere 128, okay? The 128 refers to how fine the mesh is on this, okay, the number of points on it. So these other ones are coarser, they have fewer points. Okay, like this one is 64, 32, 128, and you see they're all powers of 2, so they kind of double each time we go up. So I'm going to double click on that, and it's really going to just bring this back up again because that's all this is. Okay, so the first thing you want to do, and the reason I start with a project like that is because it has a bunch of settings turned on already. For instance, symmetry is already turned on when you open that up, and the key for turning it on and off is the X key. Okay, like so. And then this is the axis that's being made symmetrical. Okay, X, Y, or Z, and you can have many of these at once. There's also one called radial symmetry, which lets you pull things out, eight axes or eight units at a time, that kind of thing, or however many you want. Okay, so you can play around with those and see what they do. But usually X is what you want, and you can see these two dots here are showing you what's going to happen when I actually push down on the mouse and do anything. Okay, so the first thing to understand is know which way you're facing. Okay, and this thing, you can turn this and drag it, and it's not going to look any different when you have a sphere on the screen. Okay, but that's really helpful, so you can always get back in a perfectly perpendicular axis. Second thing is this size. Okay, the shortcut for this is just the S key. So if I click S and let go, it brings this up wherever my mouse is. Okay, and I can make this bigger, or drag left or right, bigger or smaller. Okay, like so. This focal shift is this interior ring. Okay, and as you make this bigger, that gets smaller, and as you make that smaller, a negative number, that gets bigger. It really has to do with how soft of a brush you're going to get when you're actually using this. Okay, so before you do anything in terms of sculpting, the main thing you're going to be using is the move tool, the move brush. Okay, so I click on brush and go to move. Okay, and there are shortcuts. If you want to hit the B key, it brings this thing up wherever your mouse is, and then you can use the other letters in that brush that you're looking for to narrow it down. So if I hit B and then M, it shows me all the brushes that start with M. Okay, and then if I hit V, I would get just this brush. Okay, but you don't have to worry about that right now. All right, so the move brush, okay, that's really the one you're going to be using all the time. Okay, and it just moves geometry around. Okay, so if I wanted to make a fish, for instance, I can start with a big brush here and just wait till it kind of goes on the side, the edge there, and just kind of push like that. Okay, and that just kind of squashed that sphere like so. And I could also drag this thing around to see. Now, a shortcut for getting these different views is when you're dragging outside the model, to hold the shift key, and it's going to jump to whatever view is closest to that. You can kind of see that head up there reflecting that. Okay, like so. And then moving around, okay, just outside the model, you're moving. inside or touching the model and you're actually changing the model. Okay, you're actually painting or sculpting or something like that. See, it's pointing to the back now. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm just going to squash this and I'm going to make it a little taller this way. Okay, and then I'm just going to grab some of this and just kind of drag, kind of make, you know, maybe a fin kind of a shape. And again, I keep hitting the S key to make this thing bigger or smaller, okay? Like so. Not very fishy right now, okay? But again, if I zoom out here, and you can do that with this zoom, no, not that one you want. Which is it now? This one, zoom 3D, okay? And there's a shortcut for this on the handout too. It's really just control and right click and then drag left and right. Okay, so if I do this, I'm going to start to pull this, make this really big and just drag like that. You can kind of see where this gets pretty easy. And if it's dragging too much, just make the mouse smaller or the size smaller. Okay, so let's say I have, you know, just something like that, and I want to just kind of push that up, pull this out, you know, push this down. Afraid it's going to look more like a goldfish cracker than anything else, but that's okay. You'll get the idea. All right. This is delightful, huh? All right. So I'm just going to make this a little, you know, more dramatic here. Okay. There we go. That kind of a thing. And realistically, these would be smaller. Those fins aren't usually as big as the body of the fish. Okay. So the way to process this stuff or to think about it is just do these big moves first of just trying to define the big shapes that you want this to have. Okay. So maybe I want to push this in a little bit. Just be careful you don't push through it, or you get weird things happening. Okay, so you kind of want to stay, you know, in the middle here. Okay, but these things, for instance, I could start making these thinner already just by pushing. And again, I'm still on that same move brush. Okay, no big whoop. Okay, now I think this thing is just too big overall, so I'm just going to start pushing this back together. Okay, so when you've got something that's kind of, you know, hinky like this, funky, there's a way you can change sizes on this thing without using the move brush, and that's this deformation menu. So for instance, there's a size thing here, and there's a little XYZ here. You can do just one axis by unchecking those guys. Okay, and you can kind of see, you know, how that can quickly squash this thing or stretch it. Okay, so that's another way to go when you're, you know, noodling around with stuff to kind of fix stuff if you want to, you know, make things look a little different. Okay. All right, so again, I'm just kind of playing around with this. And if you get into a situation where you know you don't like something, you can use this to drag and undo stuff. Okay, like down to here. Let's say I want to just, you know, start fresh. This will drag all the way out to, you know, the beginning. So it's a really quick way to undo, so you don't have to keep hitting Z all the time or Command Z. Okay, and then it's going to ask you, you're changing things in the middle. You just click OK, and it just kind of decides it's not going to. You're not going to do any more undos from that point. Okay, this kind of thing. All right. Anyway, that's the move brush. Okay, very helpful. Now these guys over here, you can turn perspective off if that starts to bug you, because it is going to make things look a little more distorted. Okay, and then this thing is just the shortcut's the F key, and that just makes whatever is on the screen as big as the screen is. So if I hit F again in this view, see how it goes down like that. Okay, like so. All right. So I'm going to just start to clean this up a little bit, make it look a little more normal. As normal as this is going to get. Okay. All right. So from top view here, if I want to make these guys thinner, like I said, just start pushing, but don't push through. Okay, I can just start to make those guys skinnier, like that. And likewise, maybe I want to puff this out a little bit at the head. Okay. So kind of depending on what view you're at and the size of the brush, you're going to get different results. Okay. So if I want this to be much bigger, make my brush bigger, and that's going to take more of that into account as it goes. Okay. And again, this is another just an easier way to do this if it's easier for you to do. Okay, so when you get something like this funny edge here, you can hold the shift key down to smooth. Okay, and that'll smooth that out. Smooth all this stuff out. Okay, like so. All right. Okay, so next brush you will use a bunch is the standard brush. Okay, and that is this one. Okay, now this one just allows you to draw lines. Okay, this kind of a thing, or cut in by holding the option key. It'll push in instead of pulling out. Okay, and so that's useful. It's pretty non-invasive. It's pretty soft. Okay, and it doesn't make big changes really quickly. For that, you're going to want to use the third brush, which is this clay buildup brush. Okay, and you'll see it has this square alpha. That's just going to be the shape of the stroke. And see how that looks kind of gross? What I would do is change this by clicking on it and make a nice soft, pick a soft one like this. And by doing that, you can make this build up more, okay, or cut in. All right, so if I wanted to cut like a mouth in, hold down Option or Alt, and just kind of drag here from the front view, and it just does that. Okay, likewise, if I want to make an eye or space for an eye or something like that, dragging there. Okay, and then going back maybe to the standard brush with a smaller size, I can start to build that up or sink it in by holding down. Okay, like that. All right, create more of a, I don't know, do fish have lips? I guess they do. That kind of a thing. All right. Okay. So that just kind of shows you the the way you can start to build that up. So you're probably wondering, how do you make it look less chunky, coarse, like that? Okay, that is this number right up here. Okay, the number of points on this thing. And because we're using something called a Dynamesh model, which is what we loaded, if we go to geometry here, and there's a whole video on Dynamesh, you'll see this orange button means this is on. So what that means is if I turn on the thing where you can actually see these points, this little button right here, Shift F, okay, you can see how these polygons get stretched. Okay, like back here, they're getting pulled and pressed and stretched, especially when you use the move tool. So if I like push this in and then pull this out, you can see how those get really weirdly stretched. Okay, Dynamesh lets you fix that just by holding on Control and dragging outside the mesh, and it's going to topologize this by kind of putting it inside a mesh that's very regular. And the mesh that it's going to use right now is set at 128. So if I Control and drag, see how that cleaned all that up? And if I turn this off now, this is still chunky, but now it's even, okay? Like so. So if I want to make that more dense so it's not as chunky, I'm going to turn this off for a second, okay? And then I'm going to go to Geometry up here and hit Divide. And that's going to multiply this by 4, okay? divide. I'll just turn this on here and you can see what's going to happen. Like so, okay? Doesn't look that different, but if I turn this off, you'll see these things are now soft, kind of soft edged, okay? And I can go back in here now and smooth these, and they're going to look less chunky. Okay, so how do you know when you do that? You just kind of have to kind of eyeball it. And when it starts looking really coarse, you can divide. And then if you want to turn Dynamesh back on, you certainly can, okay? But before you do that, you want to get rid of this division, because what this does is it shows you a lower version and a higher version, and you can move between them. Dynamesh only wants to have one of those, okay? So I'm going to click delete lower, like that. Turn this back on, like that, and you'll see it basically put this back in that form, okay? So what that means is I need to make this bigger, because remember, this is the one we started with, 128. So I'm going to take this and just double it, 256, and then turn this on. I'm also going to click this project button and just leave that on. That keeps the details as best it can. Okay, so I click that on, and you'll see that's holding up now, and now it's more dense. Okay, and like I said, I would just watch that, you know, that video. That's going to give you a little better idea of that stuff. Okay. The other really big thing you need to know is masking. Okay, because masking is super useful when you're working on this stuff. So I'm still got the move brush here. I'm going to just go to the top view here because I think this thing is too skinny. Okay, the fish itself needs a little more body. So I'm just going to pull this a bit more. Oops, that looked a little funky. Okay, just kind of thicken it up a bit. All right. And this goes both ways. You know, if I want to just push this in a bit, I can do that, you know, to kind of make it look like it has more of a bony interior there. Okay. This looks really gross, but that's okay. Sorry. Very critical of myself. All right. You can smooth these too, okay, as I said. So you can kind of smooth and they'll actually start to shrink, okay, like so, like that. Front's looking okay, but that back is just nasty. Okay, masking. That also uses the control key, okay, and when you hold down the control key, I'm going to change my brush size, and paint on the model, it turns this black. That means that area is masked. Okay, and I can paint that, and that means whatever I do won't be affected by or in that area. Okay, like so. So what use is that? By the way, you can also hold down Control and drag from the outside, and don't let go of the mouse. If you let go of the mouse, it'll just Dynamesh it again. But if you drag like this, it brings a rectangle up. Okay, that you can use to mask, okay, like so. So why would you want to do that? Well, let's just take this for an example. If I bring it up like this and use the move brush here on this, it's only going to affect these areas that aren't masked, okay? So I could give this ridges or something like that, okay, like so. Okay, and then when I unmask, and the way you unmask is you control drag outside this thing, and that unmasks it when something is masked. You control drag when there's nothing masked, it Dynameshes it. So watch this, deep, like so. Okay, so see it soften those up a bit, and I could go back in now and hold down the shift key and smooth those edges. Okay, like that. Okay, so I still have these kind of lumpy things, but I also now have these edges that I can work with. Okay. Kind of funny. Hit the F key to bring that back up, like so. All right. Okay, so another thing to do with masking is just to do something like hold on Control. Oops, that's too big. Hold on Control. I'm going to make this tiny. and just drag. Turn that on now. Like this. Okay. And if you hold down Control and Option, you can paint out the mask you just made. Okay. So if I do this, like that, maybe just smooth that a little bit. And if you Control click on a mask, it blurs it. Okay. If you Control Option click on it, it makes it harder edged. Okay. So the other thing you can do with a mask, you Control and click away from the model, and it inverts it. Okay, like so, and you probably know where I'm going with this. Now I could take this and just start to pull this up for more of a, what's this called, a dorsal fin? Something like that. Okay, you see how stretched that got? That's another time than when you would want to Dynamesh it again. Okay, and I'll just clear the mask first by clicking and dragging outside, and then just clicking and dragging again. That'll clean that up with the Dynameshing. Okay, you can kind of see now that's nice. And I can smooth that and it looks dandy. Okay, like so. Alright, so I can do that same thing on the bottom here. You know, I could also try to do it with the Move brush, but you'll see it's much easier when you have a masked area because you can really do it quickly and without any funkiness going on there. Okay, alright. Lastly, the Dam Standard brush. That's a really good one too because that cuts and kind of slices really nicely into things like this. Okay, and I'm just using a mouse here. I'm not even using a pen. But you can see how nice that cuts. Okay, so those are the ones that you're going to be using a lot. Okay, the other thing I should mention is under Stroke, there's a thing called Lazy Mouse, and this is usually on, but you can change this radius. And what that does is that smooths the stroke as you drag, and you'll see a little trail following behind this as I drag. Okay, so that gives me the opportunity to really, you know, do a nice clean curve with this if I wanted to do that. Okay, that kind of thing. All right, so that's the basic kind of stuff, and if I hold Shift here I can smooth that. Okay, I don't even like that. Maybe I want to do that under the eye here. That might be nice. Or above the eye. Okay, kind of build that out, smooth it, Shift key. Okay, so that's just kind of the basics of just, you know, dealing with this stuff, and it's it gets easier as you do it a bit. Last thing I'll tell you is there are different ways you can apply strokes. Okay, so if I go back to Standard and change this to this drag rectangle and put an alpha on this, like it's alpha 4, make my brush size a little bigger, I can drag on the model here and actually push or pull this texture onto it. Okay, if I hold on Option when I do that, it'll cut it in. Okay, you kind of see what that does to the surface there, and how very quickly you can just start to create, you know, a rockfish or some other kind of thing that's not as smooth as something else. Okay, so that's using this tool and this, okay, and just with the standard brush. And you can do this with any brushes, but the standard one does it nice and softly so it doesn't make it super dramatic. Okay, and then you can always smooth out areas if you don't want it on the fin here. Just hold Shift and smooth, you know, and that stuff will just kind of dissolve. Okay, all right, so hopefully that'll get you, you know, close. The other thing is always save from the File menu, never over here, never, never. Okay, this is for creating pictures. If you want to save your 3D file, you save over here, File. Don't turn this on, leave that off. That just saves all the undos with your file. Okay, and then just click Save As. It'll open up a dialog and you can save it wherever you want. Okay, and then that'll be in your Lightbox as recent when you return. Okay, you can see all the recent junk I've done. Okay, like so. That just toggles off. Okay, hope that helps. Try it out, give it a shot, and hopefully you can create something more gorgeous than this awful thing. But, you know, that's the way it goes. Okay, you got to go through this to get to the good stuff. All right, hang in there.